Recording. All right. Well, Wakanyi, it is my great honor.
May I ask a question, Nadja?
Yes.
If you're taking off 20 minutes early, should I record and send it to you after?
No, it's fine. I'm recording in the cloud, so that
Okay.
will not affect the
Perfect.
location of the recording, but thank you for checking. Okay, so Wakanyi Hoffman, just to introduce you very briefly to the group. So you are an amazing storyteller. I've heard some other podcasts with you and interviews, and it's just beautiful to hear you speak about the things you're passionate about. You're an author, you're a keynote speaker, and you're a scholar of Indigenous knowledge. And right now, you are a lead researcher at the Inclusive AI Lab in Utrecht. And you begin to weave Ubuntu, or have been weaving Ubuntu wisdom into AI to create new narratives for emerging futures. And this is what we're really here to talk about today. So, Wakanyi, I'm going to fix you and myself just for the beginning part of this interview. If I can figure out how to do this. Yes, so the two of us are here. Welcome. It's great to have you.
Thank you so much for having me, and hello, everyone.
Wakanyi, let's jump right in. In the beginning, in my tiny intro, I said that you are a scholar in Indigenous knowledge, and even though we should, of course, hope that most of us are familiar with what that even means, I thought it might be helpful just for readers also of our newsletter, if you described in a nutshell, what does it mean when we speak about Indigenous knowledge, and how is Indigenous knowledge different from other knowledge that's out there?
Oh, wow. Thank you so much for that question. Well, let's start with what does it mean to be Indigenous, right, as an Indigenous person, because that's often the challenge is to define indigeneity, because obviously we're all human beings. We can all trace our ancestral land or homes or genealogy, but what does it truly mean to be Indigenous? Well, first of all, from an Indigenous perspective, that means that you've been living in close proximity with the land in the same location for thousands of years. So if you take, for example, the Khoisan community in Namibia, and southern parts, borders of South Africa, they've been there for 30,000 years. So they are indigenous to that land. And what it means to have indigenous knowledge is this continuous experience and experimenting with life in the natural landscape, which the rest of us, I think, on this call couldn't possibly claim to have that level of interaction, intimate interaction with the natural landscape, right? Because we obviously live in modernity, we live in a different jungle, right? So if you take that idea of which jungle are you indigenous to? Maybe we're modern indigenous people, but to jokes aside, indigenous knowledge, therefore, is a collection of thousands of years of understanding how human beings interact with every other life form, right? So this actually takes humanity outside of the center of creation and puts us in the space where creation is ongoing. So it's a continuous evolution. So if you talk about, for example, those indigenous people that I'm talking about, the Khoisan, they've mastered the art of tracking. And tracking has been discovered to be the earliest form of science. Like our scientific experiment of inquiry came out of our tracking skills. And this is something that's still ongoing. Mind you, there's very few trained trackers available now with the Khoisan community, but still this is an art form that is as old as humanity, as old as our earliest ancestors, so to speak.
So that was a very helpful framing, and I love to see this clear connection to the land, right? So that we're not independent of a place. And that brings me to my next question, because then the question is Indigenous knowledge available to all of us? I mean, because I live in Berlin, right? You now live in Utrecht. We all live in these urban jungles. And how do we connect to that part of us that must surely somewhere, it must be somewhere, it must exist in us?
Yeah, I think one of the ways that I think one can connect to Indigenous thinking, which then leads to Indigenous knowledge seeking, is through values. What is it that we value, right? And I was fortunate enough to be involved in a project recently called Conceptions of Human Flourishing. And in this project, we were looking at, and this was at the New Institute in Hamburg. And in this project, my colleagues and I were looking at what would flourishing look like in a non-material way. So you take modernity is very much reliant on material aspect of living, right? Our quality of life has a cost implication, and cost means, you know, we need to make money. We need to have that material. We need to extract from the earth. Now, Indigenous, on the other hand, is non-material conditions of flourishing, which means there's this reciprocity of the lifestyle is reciprocal. So what you take from the earth, you have to replenish somewhere else. There's trading that doesn't necessarily have a use of money. So if you take that concept, that Indigenous way of thinking, I think that we seem to think of Indigenous as something so far removed or ancient, but actually I think a lot of us are operating in a way that can be tied back to our Indigenous roots. You know, when you are hosting a meal in your living room with friends and they come over and you have a potluck, that is a way of Indigenous thinking. You're not going to charge people for something like that. So our desire to be in community with each other, our desire to hold relationships at a higher value than what money would give us, that is an Indigenous form of thinking. So to answer your question, I think the next question would be, what are the values that we hold that are true to us if money wasn't a concern? What are those values that bring us together as humanity? And that is a form of returning or reconnecting with our Indigenous ways of knowing. So relationships are key when we're talking about Indigenous knowledge.
Mm. And for you personally, how do you hold these two worlds of modern and the traditional or the Indigenous within you? What does that mean to you personally?
I like to think of myself as this bush girl, African bush girl that also lives in a modern bush, right? So modernity and Indigenous thinking. And in a way, I think, well, I'm fortunate enough to still have very strong ties with my family and community in Kenya and around the world, you know, the African community. But beyond that, well, first of all, I'm very careful about what my contribution is on this planet. What is the contribution that I make as a singular, as a person, as an entity, right? So this is truly important to me. So in terms of seeking wealth and that sort of thing, I think of wealth as a distribution of values. What is my social currency, for example? What are the relationships that I need to maintain? What amount of time do I need to put in a particular project or a particular relationship? What is the quality of my life, and is it enough? So this idea of enoughness is very much a part of that Indigenous thinking, abundance versus scarcity, right? So I think that I would imagine that others would describe me as somebody who's not seeking the material so much as I'm seeking relationship. So this relationship building is far more important to me. And in that way, that's where I spend most of my time.
You know, a few years ago, maybe a couple of years ago, I read an article by an American, originally Israeli feminist and economist called Mickey Kashtan. And she wrote a paper called The Radical Implications of Staying Within Capacity. And she opened up a loop that somehow reminds me of what you were sharing around the connection to land, the reinterpretation of wealth. She said, you know, we're clearly not honoring the capacity limits of the planet. But this not honoring of the capacity limits of the planet starts at a much earlier point, because we don't honor our own capacity limits. That's where this whole, you know, this whole trap that we've built for ourselves has actually its origin, because we're constantly operating beyond capacity. And she said, so if you have a habit of self-exploitation, then of course it's easy for you to exploit others, because you cannot feel your own boundaries, right? You cannot feel yourself. And then when you can exploit yourself, you can exploit others. You know, what are you going to feel about the land or the planet, right? So, and what she was proposing in this article was to start, especially when you're an activist, with really paying attention to your own well-being, to redefining what wealth is for you, and to actually also acknowledge where the boundaries of your capacity are. And I'm wondering how that resonates when you hear that idea.
It absolutely resonates. And I'm fortunate enough to live in a country in the Netherlands. I don't know how many of us here are based in the Netherlands. Oh, are you? So I'm going to say something that might shock you, but I find that the Netherlands, I've lived in several countries around the world. This is the 9th country. And my expectations of, the fast-paced Western world, I live in the north of the Netherlands. So I'm in the farm village, I found a village. What I find interesting about the Dutch culture is that there's still a very strong sense of community and enoughness. There's a sensibility to how much you can amass. And this really resonates with me 100%. So for example, when we decided to buy a house in the Netherlands, my husband and I actually went through a process of understanding what is a house that's enough for us, like big enough for us. We weren't looking for a big house or a small house or this or that. We're a family of 6. So what is the square footage for Dutch standards that is enough for a family of 6? And we did. We found that, and actually our house was enough. And don't ask me how many square footage the house is. But the point is that this was important to both of us. It was very important for us to know our limits, our capacity, right? And therefore then, once you know how much you can have or how much you actually need, right? Then your lifestyle is based on that, right?
Yeah.
And from there, you have abundance. You have abundance of energy to give to projects, to people, to community, to building relationships and maintaining those ties. I mean, I think there is nothing that would be more sad than to have left this planet without having solid relationships with your family or with your partner, with your children, with your neighbors. I think we all know that at the end of the day, that's really what matters when someone is looking at life beyond this planet. So yeah, absolutely, it resonates with me. The capacity to hold yourself in relation to the earth and how much you have to give to the planet and to give to others is truly based on how much you're taking away from you as well.
Yeah. And to see yourself as something, in a sense, sacred as well, right? If we don't have this connection to self as being part of creation, then how can we have regard for anything else that is part of this creation?
Absolutely. And it goes back to values, right? So from an African perspective, which again, I say I'm fortunate enough to have been immersed in a culture that really values this way of thinking, this indigenous way of thinking. The Ubuntu philosophy is a lot about that. It's a lot about mirroring of each other's values, mirroring of this original values that we call, human interconnectedness, our interconnectedness, right? Or our interbeing. So if you're able to see yourself in relationship to someone else, then in the same way that you would not harm yourself, you wouldn't harm the other. So there's a filter when it comes to being susceptible to greed, being susceptible to unkindness or whatever it is, right? You are able to filter that because you're looking at yourself through the eyes of the other and putting yourself really in the shoes of the other person.
And you just mentioned the term Ubuntu, or the concept Ubuntu. Can you speak to that for a moment? Because I think that's an important part of your work.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. So Ubuntu is an African moral conception of what it means to be human. And of course, now in this webinar, we're talking about artificial intelligence. The question has come up over and over again in most places that I'm finding myself in, is the question of what does it mean to be human? And because this question is posed so continuously, I've been wondering about, have we lost touch with that original indigenous thinking? Because from an indigenous perspective, there's no question about what it means to be human, right? To be human is to be in relationship with everything that is alive, and evolve with the earth as well. I like to quote this, Maya Angelou once said, the earth, to grow up, the earth needs to grow up with us. And I'm paraphrasing. The point is that the earth grows at the rate of our evolution as well, and vice versa. So if we don't accept this human adventure and keep seeking some other superhuman way of living. And that goes back to this extracting from ourselves. So much of that is what we then end up doing to the planet, right? If we think that we are so much more superior than the other living beings, then we're going to extract from the thing that actually hosts all of us, right? And so Ubuntu is a way of reminding us that a person is a person through other persons, that you cannot be, your humanity is bound up with others. You can't be human, or you can't claim to be a human being without other humans mirroring that humanity that you claim to be. So in that way, it does not negate the individual experience, but it actually places you within community so that you're never alone. You're not functioning alone. You're functioning as part of this community of humanity, which is part of community of life. So we're all part of this community of life on this planet Earth. And that's Ubuntu in a nutshell.
Beautiful. So, help us to bring these two worlds together, right? Because you're trying to combine something that feels, a million miles apart: indigenous knowledge, connection to land, connection to nature, and AI, right? How do these fit together, or how do you think they need to fit together for different futures to emerge?
So look, as humanity, we can trace back our origins to 30,000 years ago with the Khoisan community in Namibia. So that's us, that's humanity, right? We discovered the wheel, we discovered, we went through the industrial revolution, we discovered the internet, and now here we are, still the same human beings evolving with our technology. And now here we are with artificial intelligence. What has brought us to this point is sort of what I'm sitting with most of the time. What are these values that from 30,000 years have been distributed throughout the world in different cultures and led us to innovate to where we're now seeking to invent a way in which something is mirroring back to us who we are. So it's another form of Ubuntu, maybe a negative form of Ubuntu if you think of AI in that way. It's mirroring back cultures, ourselves, who we are, who we claim to be as human beings. And so from that lens, I think it is also important for us to ask ourselves, what is the design, what is the base foundation of AI? How is AI reading the human being? So if we take Ubuntu as the principle of mirroring each other's humanity, and we take the idea of what does it mean to be human in the face of AI, well, AI is basically the mirror, the backlight that's been turned on, and it's now mirroring back to us who we say we are as human beings. And so you look at that and you look at the content, it's biased, it's a lot of times it's not representative of all 8 billion people on the planet. And it is, there's a lot of problems with how harmful the content is online that's now been used to train these large language models. Can we, before we go that far, before we make it a normalized artificial intelligence in our lives, is there a way of us thinking of this framework of values, our value system, and not so much the UN has already formulated its ethical, the ethics of artificial intelligence, but I'm talking really about what do we value? How can artificial intelligence read us and really reflect back to us what these conditions are for our flourishing, which are really based on what we value the most, no matter where we are in the world. And so that's where I'm looking at this research question and trying to figure out how can we design ethical designs of artificial intelligence? How can we design AI ethically using this moral conception of personhood? Meaning that then artificial intelligence can look back to us and show us what it means to have Ubuntu in our midst. Yeah.
It makes me think of the last interview I had for our series I did with a person from Japan. And so firstly, I spent 2 months in Japan this year. And what I noticed there is that Japan has a culture where indigenous knowledge, the connection to land, is still so much more prevalent than I have seen in the West, right? So the knowledge that nature is where we come from and is a place to be honored, is a holy place, is really mainstream, right? It's not niche, it's not weird, it's what most people think. And at the same time, in the last interview that I led for the newsletter, the person that I interviewed, Yuji, was talking about AI through the lens of a Japanese framework, because he said we have a very different narrative about what AI could be in our lives. So in manga, traditionally in Japan, AI has always been an aid to humanity. So for us, it's a friendly presence that actually reminds us of our humanity. And when I hear you talk, right, then I think that's exactly the kind of AI that you're envisioning, that could be a guide.
Absolutely. And look, 25% of the world's population is African. So I'm just going to talk from an African perspective, right? So a quarter of the population of the world is of African descent, right? That means 25% of the world culture is influenced by these ideas that I'm talking about, this idea of what it means to be human. It's still very much alive in African consciousness. So from that perspective, artificial intelligence, if it was designed by the African, right, using that African concept, it would be designed with the intention of something that would be helpful to us, would be helping us live better on this planet, would be helping us to live better with the earth. And I like that you bring up the Japanese concept of personhood as well. There's a professor at the Kyoto Institute of Philosophy, Professor Deguchi, and he talks about the we-I philosophy, which is very much in alignment with this Ubuntu principle of personhood, where he talks about you can't distinguish the I and the we. They operate and emerge out of the same. So we are a product of many I's. And the I is a product of the we collective, right? And that's Ubuntu in a nutshell. And if you look at that from that perspective, the Ainu indigenous people of Japan don't actually have a location. They don't have a land to claim anymore. It's been reduced to the extent that they operate, within the country. They're distributed, but their culture has influenced that Japanese thinking to the extent that everything has everything that has a material value has a spiritual value as well. And so from that perspective, it is AI is like a sacred dear friend. It's not the devil, it's actually the angel. And so if you think about it from that perspective, those are Ubuntu values in a nutshell. That is what I'm talking about. It's the idea that if we are putting ourselves out there, if artificial intelligence is the best representation of who we are, then it is upon us to care about what AI looks like. If it's a person, it's like having your own baby, right? You would care to give your child the best values that you hold dear, right? And so you would nurture that child. You wouldn't let them off into the streets and not, tell them that green means go and red means stop or whatever, right? You'd show them how to cross the road. So from that perspective, there is this requirement of all of us, no matter where we're coming from, because we can trace our humanity back to that 30,000 years ago. So that consciousness, those values, those principles of personhood are still alive, maybe distant, depending on which culture one is coming from, but still very much how we operate as human beings. So if we can go back to that mindset, that indigenous thinking, then it's easy to see that AI is not something to fear, but actually something to work with. And maybe we might even end up designing it slightly differently or design a whole other system that still assists us to live better on this planet.
Yeah. So, I'm just looking at, I want to hand over to the audience in a moment, but there is something that comes up for me as sort of a closing question to you. Just before we checked in for this call, we were both talking about the grief essentially we feel at the outcome of the US elections and how foreboding that feels on so many levels. And, I felt so betrayed that such a moment of potential turnaround in, maybe even in human history, to have a first female and Black president of such a powerful country that was, within reach, right?
Yeah.
And then it just all went boof. But I'm wondering, Wakanyi, what do you think is in particular the role of women in this which we are seeking to create? Do you think we have a special role in this? And if yes, What is it?
Wow, the role of women. Well, look, women have been marginalized for such a long time that it seems as if no sooner do women have an edge then that equality gets taken out, So there's a question of agency and freedom, right? If you look at what happened in the US, there was a lot of talk about freedom. But I think what was also lacking in that narrative is the idea of agency. Freedom comes with agency. Freedom, we are all free to do what we want to do. But agency is something, it's the action. Is that, that's what we don't have, is the agency to perform our duties to our highest potential as humanity. Ubuntu values, that framework of values is actually a female ethical framework of how to be human. And a lot of scholars might say, you can't dump this on women continuously. But the idea is that because mothers were at home with the children, a lot of times, they ended up being the ones who taught children or mirrored back children the humanity. So storytelling is an amazing art form that women have in abundance, right? That is one thing we do have. Like, storytelling is a human concept, of course, but we need more women storytellers. We need to hear more stories of women. What are women actually experiencing? And I think this is something that is lacking in society. There was an interesting statistic I read recently. Something like half of the books written by women are never read by men. So it means that, we're writing stories for ourselves. This division of genders is unbelievable, right? And so can we find ways to write new narratives that actually speak to all of us as humanity? And if women were to flood the world with stories, with authentic stories about what it truly means to be a woman, not what it means to be a woman in a man's world or what it means to be a woman versus a man, this, not this or the other, but actually the authentic stories of what it takes to inhabit this female body, that might begin to change society's perspective and thinking. And we might come to a point where we can at least think equally, right? We might not be equal in terms of, we might not get equal pay today, but we can start to think equally because we can see clearly that there's a different way of inhabiting the world depending on which body you're naturally or biologically born with. So I think storytelling is an amazing way of getting us out there as women, and of course men as well, because if stories aren't being heard and being read on the books, maybe they'll be heard in these kinds of spaces.
Yes, may the goddess hear you, whoever needs to listen into this. Wakanyi, I'd love to take just a moment of pause before we transition to the Q&A and invite, I'm going to unpin us, and in this moment of reflection, just invite all of us to really go inwards for a few breaths and just notice, listening to what Wakanyi has shared, how does that sit with you? How did it make you feel to listen to her? Was there anything in particular that you found gave you hope? Is there something that you would like to know more about, where she just brushed upon a huge area of knowledge and this would be the moment to dig a bit deeper? Just for a moment, feel your own body. And feel all of the other bodies in this space. And I find it interesting also looking at our participant list today to realize we have two wonderful men with us today, and the rest of us in non-male bodies. So we have two messengers into the male world. And take another deep breath in and out. Yeah, and actually, I will stay for a few more minutes, but Clarissa, if I can already hand over to you to just moderate the Q&A, that would be amazing. And then in about 7 minutes or so, I will quietly leave you to complete with Wakanyi. And Wakanyi, already, thank you so much from my side. I've taken so much hope away from this conversation.
Thank you, Nadja, and all the best safe travels to you.
Thank you. May the travel gods be with us.
Get your bus on time.
Okay, so what's resonating in you? What yeah, questions came up? And also just what Wakanyi was talking about, the mirroring, right? What is maybe something you want to mirror back to her, because she is seen and seeing herself also through our eyes, of course. Cast.
Very short question because my voice is fragile. I hope you can hear me. The last 5 minutes, I started feeling very uncomfortable about what you were sharing, Wakanyi. The question is, what is your message to the men actually listening to you? So that's to us at the moment. What's your message to us?
Thank you so much, and thank you for sharing your discomfort. My message to men listening to us, particularly at this point in the world, is what stories do we need to share that we're not sharing with each other? Because there's a huge communication breakdown, I believe, in the world in general. There's a communication breakdown between parents and children. There's a communication breakdown between men and women, between different cultures, between different people of different skin tones even, right? We have a lot of information, but what we're lacking is actual lived experiences, lived knowledge that's been, and if you take that indigenous thinking, what is that embodiment? What does it mean to be embodied in a masculine world, right? What does it mean to be embodied in a feminine world? What are these stories that we think we know? I think I know what it means to be a man, right? And a man thinks they know what it means to be a woman, but actually we don't. So can we get comfortable enough to share those very deeper details of what it actually means? What are our greatest fears and our hopes and aspirations? And maybe from there, we will find that we're not so different after all. That those things that we think are dividing us are actually moments, are actually little knots that could be untied to bring harmony between these communities, different communities around the world. So to the men in the room, I would urge to listen, really listen with suspend any kind of judgment, right? Of yourself, right? Of whatever judgment you might have of yourself. And in that moment, try and inhabit that other world that is unknown, completely unknown, and vice versa to the women in the room. Suspend any kind of judgment you might have towards the other world, right? The masculine world or whatever. And try and imagine what it means today in 2024 to inhabit that world. What are these fears that we have? We might find that we're actually all afraid of the same thing. We're afraid of losing relationships with ourselves, with each other, and with the planet. And I think that those are the stories that perhaps will bring us to a point of understanding what it means to be human, and not just what it means to be woman or man or whatever. What it means to be human is when we can transcend all these descriptions and definitions of who we truly are. Thank you.
Clarissa, I'm going to hand over to you now.
Okay, I see you having the next question.
Nadja, first of all, travel safe. Looking forward to the next time, the next call. Wakanyi, I have a question. Maybe just a few words on myself. I've been doing quite a lot of work in South Africa, actually around the globe. And there is something else that is keeping me busy in life, which is the other definition of AI. So I know that these days we talk about artificial intelligence, but I have been involved in a community that's talking about appreciative inquiry when they use AI. So my questions are you familiar with the work of appreciative inquiry, which, by the way, we have done quite a bit in Africa, and it's all about the storytelling. I mean, when Nadja said, how does it feel? I mean, I felt like I'm kind of overwhelmed with joy and happiness. So it's so that even the men can have quite different opinions, so to say. So where Kirst is feeling somewhat uncomfortable, I'm excited about what you shared. I'm really excited. It feels like a fountain that's bringing beautiful. But I was wondering, are you familiar, as said, with the work of appreciative inquiry, which is all about the storytelling? It's all about the stories that we have and actually listening and respecting to each other's stories. And you also mentioned the word flourishing. In that sense, there is quite a bit of work done at Case Western Reserve University about flourishing, and I see you not, so it sounds like you know that. I was just wondering whether you connect these dots or whether you're familiar with that. And otherwise, I'd be very excited to talk to you. I'm living in the Netherlands, as said, and I'd be happy to travel to wherever you are in the Netherlands to talk about that. But I was wondering whether you are familiar with these concepts of like appreciative inquiry and flourishing, and Kent Gergen's work on relationships, being in relationship, which is, as you said yourself, it's key in what we do.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Joop. So listen, I don't know much about the appreciative inquiry. I would welcome that. Please send that to me. I'd love to see what that kind of work looks like. There is another AI platform for Indigenous people set up by, Nadja, thank you. That was set up by, it's called Abundance Intelligences. And this is probably similar to what you're saying. You know, there's a lot of this emerging thoughts of how do we spin this AI to be something actually useful to humanity and sustainable from an Indigenous lens. Sustainability means something that is happening every day, right? We're living sustainably every day, not working towards, you know, sustainability is not a goal to achieve, but actually something we do every day. We live do you live in a sustainable manner every day? Do you care about your environment around you? So that's sustainability from an Indigenous perspective. And abundance intelligence is also looking exactly at that. What is the role of storytelling? Because storytelling is central to passing down Indigenous knowledges, right? And so from an African perspective, storytelling is, even as an educator, that's a pedagogical approach to learning. And so if we take that, if storytelling is the thing that distinguishes us from other species out there, then we have an opportunity within AI to tell different stories. And that's why, to me, like the role of storytelling is so undervalued now. We're talking a lot. There's a lot of noise online. There's a lot of communities online, but there are no stories really emerging out of this. If you look at what happened in the US, for example, there's a lot of news, but not enough storytelling. Stories help us connect with each other. And so that is the thing that we have in common. And it is an Indigenous art form of flourishing. So going back into what Nadja was asking, how can we connect the dots from ancient Indigenous ways of living and now modernity and AI? Perhaps the thing that stayed consistent throughout, one Indigenous way of being, is storytelling. And so we need to evaluate and investigate what are the stories that we will need to tell ourselves in order to move into relationship with each other. And once we move into real, authentic relationships with each other, then we can move into relationship with other life forms and also relate to the earth in a way that makes sense interculturally, not just for one culture, right? We can't expect Indigenous people to be the only ones who have the experience of living in harmony with the planet. I think that conversation is happening at a much higher level, even within these systems modern system that we live in. But embodiment of that art of being in relationship is what's lacking. And I think that comes out of shared stories, really shared interpersonal stories. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you for the question as well. And please share with me the
Yeah, some information on appreciative inquiry. I will.
so much. Yeah.
Anybody else have a question for Wakanyi? Christina?
I don't have a particular question for Wakanyi. It's been amazing to hear you. It's more a reflection on because I guess I've resonated all through the discussion, even if I was cooking and I was doing other things, right? But I guess what I find we should be reflecting on is how do we create those spaces? I posted it there, right? So storytelling happens in relationship. So how do we create these spaces where we can be in relationship between ourselves in a meaningful way and with AI in a meaningful way? AI is a tool and it's mirroring to us what we are. So the work is in ourselves, right? How do we actually get to be a harmonious human being and have a good relationship between those two aspects, feminine and masculine, in myself, and then I can be a whole human being, right? So those are the thoughts that have been triggered in me, listening to you and with my own embodiment, I guess, of what it means to be human, not only to be a woman, but to be human.
Thank you so much, Christina. So community is emerging as the most essential. So every relationship happens in community, right? So I think to your question, who do we need to become in order to form real communities? And community, I make the distinction between community and circles, right? Circles I find to be something that looks like community, but it is not. Circles are little clubs, little spaces where others are not included. Community is something that is dynamic. You can move in and out of different communities. Your family is one community. Your friends are part of another. You're part of another community of friends, or your colleagues at work, that's another community. And you can if you can find ways within yourself, right, to merge those different spaces that you exist in and be able to bring your stories from different communities to others, then in a way you're sharing stories from one space to another. You're connecting humanity, and you never know where that seed that you're planting, where it's going to land and with whom. And there's a lot of talk about loneliness, right? When we're talking about AI, that AI on the one hand, it's a wonderful tool, but on the other hand, it's creating a lot of loneliness for a lot of people, and then as well being used as a solution for solving this loneliness that is rising in the world, so to speak. And there are wonderful people all around the world working on this from a research perspective. I know somebody, for example, in Berlin who is very much interested in discovering how to share loneliness. How can human beings, we come together because we have a shared problem. So if loneliness is a problem that one feels, then you're going to find other people to share that loneliness with. So I think there's a question to all of us, and I don't have a clear answer, but I think the question to all of us is, how can we overcome this fear of not belonging and realize that we all belong anyway? We belong to this planet, all of us. So if we start from that larger sense of belonging, we can then start to belong in our smaller communities. You can start to repair the bonds between family members. You can start to repair the bonds between people in the same neighborhood, or in the same community, or in the workplaces. I think it is very much up to each of us as an individual, right? We cannot leave that to society. Society is made up of individuals. So all of us are part of society, and society is part of us. If you think about it in that sense, then you have a responsibility to begin to repair the relationships in your own life. And that way, then you'll be able to hold the space for community, for a harmonious community to grow. And if that community looks harmonious, the other person is going to want to be part of that community. And so it grows. So I think it really begins with the individual, but of course the individual cannot function without community. So you have to repair the community around you in order for you to be able to flourish.
Yeah, and I guess the answer is really, who do we need to become, each one of us, to be in flourishing communities,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
And with flourishing AI.
exactly. Thank you.
Thank you. Rike, you want to close
Yes.
your...
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Wakanyi, for this beautiful conversation. It's very nurturing, and thank you for generously sharing your wisdom with us. I really take a lot from this conversation. I have a two-parted question. I think that we all kind of touched upon the potential role of AI, and we had like metaphors or images as like AI is like a baby, but we also said AI is a tool. Harari likes to say AI becomes an agent at this point, who actually acts on its own terms potentially. And I think that's very interesting that we're building something and at the same time trying to understand it, talking about the mirroring, going back and forth.
Yeah.
And I would like to ask you, how do you work with AI right now in detail, maybe? How do you work with the large language models potentially to close that gap, so to speak, that you were talking about earlier, of like creating an AI that could potentially become an elder or maybe even like an ancestor of some kind, talking about this shared knowledge and the long wisdom. How can we close the gap and get closer to an AI that can actually be a helper or potentially a translator? That would be the first part of the question. And then the second part would be, I'm an artist, and I'm coming in from an interest of the non-human as well, talking about the land, talking about nature, and talking about living beings. Some think that AI could be a helper there to understand non-human intelligence in the first place, to see it as such, to worship it more. Do you think I could help there, or do you think there's like potentially something that I'm missing right now, talking about mirroring? Yeah, thank you so much for maybe answering.
Thank you, Rika. Thank you so much. I'll start with the second question because the first one is more of a practical question. How am I using AI? What am I, how am I designing or working with AI? But to your second question, for me personally, I have a lot of love for art and artists, and I almost want to hold that space as the most sacred last space that AI needs to indulge in. So to some extent, I feel like artists need to secure their place in the natural world without necessarily wandering into the artificial world, because art is what is mirroring back to us what really is the things that we don't see, that we don't notice. Artists are noticers, right? Artists are, especially in this moment in time, we need art that isn't superficial or made up. We need those experiences, and art is a human experience that is mirrored back to us in an art form, right? Whether it's in a painting or a sculpture, whatever, it is actually the experience of the artist. And the experience of the artist is the experience of all of us, right? So I'm not sure that AI at this point can mimic what it means to have a full embodied human experience. So I would love for our artists to just keep having those human, painful and beautiful human experiences, the whole range of it, and reflect back to us what we might not be seeing, right? Those of us who are maybe not artists in that respect, right? Or visual artists. Now to the second question, I've been working with an organization called Service Space, and Service Space has been collecting data on compassion-related stories, compassion-related content for more than 25 years, since the beginning of social media, even before social media became a thing. And that database has created an AI GPT called Awaken AI, and I can type it back down here. And what that is it's various faith leaders from around the world, to spiritual leaders from different parts of the world, wisdom keepers as well, coming together and sharing their wisdom in artificial intelligence. So with the Awaken AI, when you go, and it's called Compassion Bot, right? So if you go into the Compassion Bot, you will find several different bots that are led by people who've dedicated their lives to understanding the human condition, right? to understanding what it means to be human, whether that is from a Buddhist perspective, from a Muslim perspective, from a Tao perspective, from an ancient philosopher's perspective, from an Ubuntu perspective. And my contribution to that is indigenous knowledge. So there are indigenous wisdom keepers who've also contributed some of the knowledge from different parts of the world into this AI system. So, and of course, I'm going to be a little bit biased and say it is the best AI system that I've come across. But the idea is, so for example, if you take my bot that is also available there, what I've done with that is we've developed it to be able to respond back in stories rather than respond and give you a clear answer. You know, if I want to go to Berlin right now, which way do I go? It will begin with a story. And then this happened. And then, you know, it's very much playing around with this form, with this art form of storytelling. And in the process, getting you to think about the answer to your question. And maybe even think about the prompt. And I'm actually more interested in why people prompt AI the way that they do, because that's in itself a story starter. What is this little fire why did you flick the fire that way? You know, why did you light the match that way? Why not the other way, right? Why did you build that fire that way? Then from there, we're also in a way training AI to think in terms of storytelling, in terms of that art form that is very much how we express our deepest needs, desires, fears, and all of that. So that's in a practical way, that's how I am using artificial intelligence. And I'll send that to you if anyone's interested to check on Awaken AI.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for the question and the lovely answers. Interesting. Valerie, you have a question?
Many things are echoing to me. First, your name, because in Lakota, Sioux natives, your name, Wakantanka, means the great sacred. So, wow, first. Then another pop-up when you were speaking about Japan, and when I lived there, what thing was really amazing for me was that in everywhere you go for buying apples or oranges or mandarins, it's not 1 kilo charged, it's 5 pieces. So maybe you know that Japanese have got different cultures depending on the north, south, and blah, 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 and or middle or seaside. So it is one related point nature gave them for buying things. Another pop-up is that the teacher, the people we were speaking about, his name is Deguchi.
Yes.
Yeah, and it means exit in Japanese. You know. Yeah, so very interesting. And about being part of and engage yourself. And Christina knows well because she welcomed me several times. And I am an artist. And my most difficult art to play is to go in residence to people. You know, so it's not just creating and speak about with volumes, with ceramic or colors, with paintings. And it's my art of being and trying to go in residence, mainly in Peter Koenig's group, you know, so people already engaged in a way to see each other, to see yourself, and you master your Pinocchio, you know, and the other one likes, it's, you know, this. And it's very, very difficult because it's great presence and great moments I'm sharing with people. And I think as a foreigner, a stranger, it nourishes another part of the people who are welcoming me, because I'm not in their clan. And myself, it's not my clan, it's not my family, it's not my country most of the time, but it enables all of us to reflect about what are my bases, my links to my family, to my child, to my husband, to whatever, to my country. And being part actively, I'm an activist in the way that I'm not just creating, as I said, things to be sold, as I'm engaged myself to go in another way in other countries. It's not my home, and I'm 56, so it's not easy, you know, to change. It's not my bed, it's not anyway. But I think it is a very interesting way to play my indigenous and to reflect this. And so as for EA, I'm not really in yet, but I wanted to tell all the echoes I received from what you said. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I think, Valerie, I mean, what you're describing as yourself, what I'm hearing is you are a community weaver already within yourself, and you are drawn to communities that are of people that have something different to share with you. And so you walk into these spaces with abundance because you also have something to share. And I think that goes back to what we were talking about here is even when you don't have anything in your hands to share, right? We have stories. We have our own human experiences to share with each other. So that in itself is a form of abundance, that we don't come empty. You know, you are a product. I come as one, but I'm one of 10,000, right? So at any point I can draw from any of the stories that have shaped who I am. And in any moment, I can bring that story to the present, and it could touch somebody else's life. So art, going back to, you know, Rike, we were talking about artists and conserving and being able to hold sacred the art form. Storytelling is also a very sacred art form. And I think we need to maintain that within us, dignify each story as essential to realizing our full potential as humanity. So I appreciate that very much. And thank you for giving me the definition of my name from your culture. I've had that before as well. And Deguchi, I'll be able to tell him as well, the exit. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, we have 11 o'clock right now. It was a very full, I feel like what you've just shared was sort of a, you know, an ending, a good sum up, reminding us of community and how different it can show up as family or as a broader, now I want to say circle, but I'm not a doesn't
that's
feel
okay.
right anymore. A broader circle to weave a community into, maybe something like that. So I in honoring this is a CU conscious you space. We all unmute, and we're just gonna say bye to each other through massaging or poking the other. Yes, say hi and bye to the neighbors. And
That's
wish
very
each other a wonderful day or whatever you need. Have a great day. And thank you so much, Wakanyi, for all your
Thank you so much. Take good care.
one more.
Bye-bye.
Did you the link that you put in didn't work for some?
No,
Did we
it didn't
find
work. It didn't work. It
yeah,
got
I put in the correct link.
Ah,
Thank you
wonderful.
so much. I noticed that. I was very grateful that somebody found the right link because I only typed.
Okay, wonderful. Perfect. So everybody who wanted the link can have it.
Thank you.
Good.
Oh, take care.
Take good care. Bye-bye.
Good day.
Bye.
And enjoy your community wherever it is.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you
Bye.
so much. Bye.
Bye-bye.